School for Whatnots. Chapter 58. Josie's Answer. Enlighten us, the grumbliest of all the Francis Miranda Gonzagas said. This was the same one who'd growled at Max only moments ago. Josie ignored the android's tone. It was the word invent that tipped me off, she said. Certainty sang in her very bones. She almost felt like laughing. This was going to be so much fun to explain. Invention is the start. The answer has to be about what Francis Miranda Gonzagas thought at the very beginning. All those reasons the others gave, she gestured at her friends, those were probably reasons that came later, if they were things that Francis Miranda Gonzaga actually cared about, not just how all of you interpreted the mission of the Whatnot Corporation. All the Model 82958s ahead of her shifted their feet guiltily side to side, as if she'd guessed exactly right about how much power they had over the Whatnot Corporation. But none of you were around at the beginning, Josie said. Francis Miranda Gonzaga couldn't have had any Whatnots before she invented them, so you only know what she's told you. In the beginning, she was alone. Somehow, the word alone almost choked her. It reminded her of her first night at school, the way she'd been so frightened, alone for the first time in her life. But maybe Francis Miranda Gonzaga had always been alone before she'd invented Whatnots. And I figured this out because of looking around at Max and Ivy, Lucinda and Ashley, Josie said, and Lola. None of us could have gotten through this maze alone. None of us could have even survived our time at school alone. We all... Could you get to the point? The grumbling Model 82958 demanded. You don't need to show your work. We don't need to know every thought in your head. None of us are getting any younger here. Josie shot a pitying look. What a thing to focus on at a time like this. Okay, Josie agreed. Francis Miranda Gonzaga invented the first Whatnot because she wanted a friend. Josie was so sure she was right, but she held her breath anyway. No buzzer sounded. The Whatnots didn't confer. In fact, they seemed to be holding their breath too. Josie was waiting for chimes, but they didn't sound either. But suddenly all the bossy Whatnots turned at once away from Josie and the others. The Whatnots bowed down, their knees on the floor, their faces in veils and hoods tilted low. For once they couldn't roll completely down into the floor, vanishing in a flash. Instead, they all froze in place, each one of them a vision of reverence. They looked like loyal subjects from some history video, awaiting the arrival of a king or queen. None of them moved again. Hello? Josie called. I'm right, aren't I? No answer. It's like they're nothing but things again, Ivy whispered. They were always just things, Lucinda muttered. Josie took a look for Lola. She was half crouching, half standing. Slowly, she stood the rest of the way up. Oh, I can still move, Lola said, sounding embarrassed. I can still talk. And then Josie forgot about watching Lola, because finally she heard another sound. But it wasn't chimes, it was a click. Josie hadn't even noticed the plain white wall beyond all the bossy Whatnots. She certainly hadn't noticed the single plain white door in the middle of the wall. Only now did she realize all the Whatnots were bowing toward the door, and it must have been the door that made the click, because now the door was just barely creeping open. Chapter 59. Max in awe. Josie, I think you won, Max exulted. Your prize must be behind that door. Josie turned questioningly toward Iva, Lucinda, and Ashley. Go ahead, Lucinda said brusquely. You won fair and square. You were the one, Lola marveled. This must be what that meant. The door stopped moving. It was only open a crack, and while Max could imagine all sorts of treasures behind it, he couldn't actually see anything. You have got to be kidding, Josie said. We all won this together. I am not the one anything. Anyhow, I'm not stepping through that door by myself. They all linked arms with Josie in the middle. They stepped past the silent, still rows of lifeless, reverent Model 82958s. Keeping their elbows intertwined with Max and Ivy, Josie gave the door a gentle nudge. The door squeaked on its hinges, opening all the way. Max peeked over Josie's shoulder. He'd imagined piles of precious, gleaming jewels or shiny gold coins. Or because he was his father's son, he could envision stacks of difficult-looking certificates that would entitle Josie to all sorts of stocks and bonds, giving her the rights to profit from dozens of important companies. But the dimly lit space before them was empty except for a single bed right in the middle of the room. Was it maybe a hospital bed? At first, Max thought the bed was empty too. Then he blinked and realized a woman was lying there. It was just that she took up so little room under the plain white institutional looking sheets. She was so shrunken, so skeletal, so clearly very, very ill. And her hair was white. Her face was white. The pillow beneath her head was white. She wasn't very easy to see. But then she smiled. Beside Max, Lola gasped and disentangled her elbow from her. She bent down in a hasty bow, so similar to the pose of all the whatnots frozen in reverence behind them outside the door. Only Lola straightened right back up immediately afterward. Francis Miranda Gonzaga, Lola breathed. It's you! It's really you! Chapter 60, The Narrator's Aside. What can I say? Not my finest moment. I'm a narrator. You'd think I could be a little more eloquent. But you try meeting someone you've been in awe of your entire life. Someone you thought might only be mythological, only a legend. Someone you've secretly suspected for years was actually already dead. Someone you fear might die at any moment, right before your eyes. Chapter 61, Josie the Friend. Oh no! Josie said. Even to her own ears, she still sounded like she did in kindergarten, wanting to help Max fix his name tag, wanting to make sure he discovered mud puddles. But now all her distress was focused on the old sickly woman in the hospital bed before her, the old sickly woman who was completely alone. What can we do to help? Josie asked. It should be noted, Josie did have a moment of feeling disappointed that she hadn't opened the door on a room full of treasures. A moment of thinking, is this the only prize? She was human after all. But Josie's life hadn't exactly prepared her to expect treasures around every corner. So she wasn't surprised not to see treasures. And her heart ached to see the painful way the woman turned her head, the effort it took the woman to lift her head from the pillow, the struggle the woman seemed to have to make just to breathe. Because again, Josie was human after all. You came, the woman struggled to say, her voice sounding as rusty as the hinges on the door. That helps. But what can we do now? Josie asked, because this felt like an emergency, like it would matter to take action immediately. What do you need, Francis Miranda Gunner? What are we even supposed to call you? In an emergency, it seemed particularly insane to go through 9 syllables merely to address the woman. Francis Miranda Gonzaga stared dreamily up at the ceiling. When I was a child, longing for a friend, she whispered, I always thought I'll tell her to call me Mira, because that means look in Spanish, and I always thought a friend would really see me. Slowly, 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 she turned her head farther to gaze directly at Josie. Nobody has ever called me Mira. But you had whatnots, Max burst out. You invented them. You could have told them to call you anything you wanted. Whatnots, Francis Miranda Gonzaga, Mira said. She seemed to be trying to wave her hand dismissively, but she did it so weakly her hand fluttered above the white sheet. Whatnots were never my friends, or they were more like mirror friends. You know how a lonely child will sit in front of a mirror and make faces and hold out her hands and babble and pretend that the image in the mirror is a friend responding? Josie, Ivy, Lucinda, and Lola nodded. Max and Ashley looked surprised. Do you know how old I was when I fashioned my first whatnots? Mira asked. I was 12. And for years after that, I thought, I just need to come up with a better design. I just need to improve my skill with robotics. I just need stronger AI. But alas, it was my starting premise that was flawed. I didn't need better whatnots. I needed humans. And by then, Mira's ancient lips puckered. Josie wasn't sure the old woman could form a single other word, but she did. By then, Mira repeated, her voice lowering into barely an audible whisper. By then it was too late. It's not too late, Josie said, though truthfully she wasn't sure. The bossy whatnot's words, none of us are getting any younger here, made sense now. That whatnot had been talking about Francis Miranda Gonzaga, not Josie or her friends. But surely, if Mira could manage the burst of words, she wasn't that desperately sick, was she? She could still be rescued, couldn't she? Ivy and Lucinda must have been thinking along the same lines because they sprang toward the hospital bed. Lucinda took Mira's papery thin wrist in her own hands and quickly reported, Her pulse is weak, but it's steady. Ivy felt Mira's forehead and added, Her fever's not that high. Wow, Ashley said. You can tell that without a thermometer or fancy blood pressure machine or. Our dad's a nurse, Lucinda said, the pride clear in her voice. A nurse's aide, anyway. He taught us all sorts of things. He says sometimes the human touch is better because machines can go hinky. Huh, Ashley said. I don't think my parents have ever taught me anything useful like that. They say machines are better than humans at everything, which could be why they tried to hire whatnots. I think Mira needs some real nurses, Ivy said as if offering a professional opinion. Real nurses, real doctors. You have doctors and nurses helping you already, right? Max asked anxiously. All sorts of medical people who come in just for you. I have the whatnots, Mira said haltingly. They try, but you know, I never anticipated them needing any more than a fifth grade education, and then when they did, I was too sick to give them upgrades. They ran my business. They took care of me. They took care of you. Now she was looking only at Josie, Ivy, and Lucinda. So, what Josie won was the chance to take care of you? Ashley asked. She grimaced as if she could barely hold herself back from rolling her eyes. Yes, yes, we should talk about winning before it's too late, Mira said. But her voice trailed off. She blinked, and for a moment it seemed like she might not open her eyes again. But then she did. She just seemed lost afterward, peering around in a baffled way. Josie answered your question, Lola reminded her. Josie understood, just like you expected. You said she was the one way back when Josie was about to have her first day of kindergarten. I'm sure it was you who wrote that. I analyzed the digital underpinnings of the text. You knew how to do that with only a fifth grade education? Max asked. Lola gazed humbly down at the floor. I might have enhanced myself a little, she admitted, because I thought it would help Josie. Is there a phone here now? Josie asked, gazing around. Can we call an ambulance? No, no, no phone, Mira murmured. Oh my, this is awkward. Painstakingly, she lifted her head from the pillow and gazed directly at one child from after another. Josie, I did write that you could be the one the night before you started kindergarten, the same time I asked you to be seated beside Max. But I wrote that about Ivy too, the first time I saw her draw a castle. And I wrote it about Lucinda when I saw her displaying leadership skills as far back as preschool. So you just meant I could be the one who would become Max's friend? Josie said. The words felt heavy in her mouth. And you thought Ivy could be his friend too? And Lucinda could be Ashley's friend? This was strange. She was Max's friend. She was glad they were friends, but it made her feel like a fake whatnot again, to think that being his friend was the only way she mattered. Or that Ivy and Lucinda didn't matter outside their friendships with Max or Ashley either. That as poor kids, they had to have rich kids to be important. This was as bad as being a fake whatnot. No, 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 Mira moaned, as if she were in physical pain now. I wanted you all to be friends, of course, but that isn't why I wrote she could be the one about any of you. I also wrote that about Ashley when I saw her make friendship bracelets for everyone in her class. And I wrote he could be the one about Max when I saw how happy he was just playing in a mud puddle. I ended up writing it at one time or another about every child. Every child in every school run by the Whatnot Corporation. Every school that was actually just full of real human kids. Then what did it even mean? Lola asked. The one who. Mira seemed so weak again. She seemed incapable of saying anything else. Or maybe she was just overcome with shyness? Suddenly, Josie understood. You mean the one who could be your friend? Josie blurted out. You were still looking for a human friend? You're an adult and you still wanted a friendship bracelet? Ashley asked doubtfully. You still wanted to play in mud puddles? Mira had tears in her eyes. I never fit in anywhere as a child, she said. I never even tried. I never looked for anyone else who loved gears and gadgets And the whole idea of androids as much as I did. I was too shy, too afraid of being rejected. I always locked myself away with my androids and hid behind them. Then, even though the whatnots I invented disappointed me, I thought they would still be like starter friends for other kids, like the training wheels on bicycles. I wanted everyone in the world to have friends I lacked, but the whatnots didn't help anyone else either. Kids need kids. They need to learn from each other. They need to make mistakes and be forgiven and do better the next time. But the Whatnot Corporation was already huge. My Whatnot schools were already everywhere. The parents I talked to wanted more and more Whatnots. So I began cheating. I brought in real kids to be fake being whatnots. I told myself they were getting opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise, an education they wouldn't have otherwise. But I always knew it wasn't fair. No, it wasn't, Lucinda said. But even she sounded more sad than angry now. But then I would watch the kids in my schools and I would think, oh, what a good friend that child would make. What a good friend that child would make, Mira said. I wanted to be friends with all of you, but friendship is a two-way street. Who was I to want to be friends with any of you when my corporation was lying to your parents? When my schools were forcing you to keep secrets from your best friends? Nobody said anything. Then Lola ventured, maybe if. Mira waved her hands, her words away. No, let me finish, she said, while I still can. All I had to offer as a friend was my whatnots and the Whatnot Corporation. I set up a testing ground, I thought. If any child could make it through my maze and answer the final question, to know what I'd wanted from the very beginning, that child would win my friendship. And that child would win. You're giving Josie the Whatnot Corporation? Max asked, his voice cracking with excitement. Yes, Mira said. I am old, and I am about to die. And when I do, Josie will inherit everything I own. Lola, would you? She gestured weakly to the side, pointing down. Was there something on the flat metal surface beneath the mattress? Lola seemed to understand. She reached down and pulled out a sheaf of papers and a heavy old-fashioned pen, then handed them to Mira. This makes everything official, Mira murmured, grasping the pen. She shuffled to the last page of the stack of papers and painstakingly began writing FRANC. Josie watched the letters flow so slowly out of Mira's pen. Now I can help my dad the way I've always wanted, she thought. Now I won't have to worry about taking any more tests to get a good grade, get into a good middle school. And I can cheer with Ivy and Lucinda, too. Frances Miranda Gonzaga had so many letters in her name. Josie had time to remember changing Max's name tag. All those years in kindergarten when she told him it'd be easier to go by Max than Maximilian. She had time to remember all her nights of huddling alone in her hidden room beneath the charging station drawer, while her father tried to sound cheerful on the other end of the phone. She had time to remember saying to Ivy, "You're just a whatnot," and having Ivy say back to her, "You're just a whatnot, too." Josie had time to remember all that, and Frances Miranda Gonzaga was now starting on the G of Gonzaga, and there was still time. Josie jumped up and dived toward the hospital bed. She yanked the stack of papers from under Mira's pen, which turned the beginnings of a G into a long, thick, dark line running down the page. While everyone else stared at her in astonishment, Josie lifted the papers high in the air and ripped them exactly in half. No! Josie screamed. I don't want the Whatnot Corporation. You can't give it to me.